welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Alina.
I know you've also started your podcast, and I always wonder, like, from when people do their own podcast and try to kind of interview, and now you're on the other side. Now you're the one being interviewed. You're the one on the side. So I always find it funny because when I'm a guest, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was like, this is what it feels like. So, but I'm gonna make it as
Exactly.
enjoyable as possible to you today.
It's definitely a different vibe being on the other side for sure. It's
Yeah.
actually a little bit more nerve-wracking than when I'm doing it myself.
It is. It is. I agree. It's easy to ask questions, right?
Exactly. But I'm really excited to be here and I really appreciate you asking me to join and share my story.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your story. Let's get started. Let's give us a little snapshot of who's Erin.
Yeah. So I am a woman in her 50s. I worked in corporate America in my in my 20s. And I had one child at the time. And then I became pregnant with my second, ended up having to quit work on bed. I was on bed rest. And at that point, my husband and I just kind of made the decision that I was going to become a stay-at-home mom. We just kind of figured out with logistics of two professionals that it was just going to be kind of easier for me to stay at home. And it was something that I really wanted to do at the time, but it was a decision that we made jointly. So for about 15 years, 14 years, let's just say, give or take, I was the stay-at-home mom. I was the mom that was the room mom. I developed programs for my kids' schools doing health and wellness, health and wellness committees. I did all kinds of activities in the school. I was just threw the best birthday parties, right, for my kids. And for many years, that was what I did, and I loved it, and I wouldn't trade that time for anything. But then I had a third child in between, in somewhere in those years, and at that point decided that I was just ready. When he got to a certain age, I was ready to start doing something that gave me flexibility. And I became a yoga teacher and taught for several years, and decided then to continue my education to become what is called a yoga therapist. It's just basically, instead of using yoga like to get fit physically, it's more using yoga to get fit on a deeper level, right? It's using yoga for healing from trauma, from chronic pain, all of those issues that people have. Sometimes it can be have a physical like origin, but oftentimes it's manifested itself into becoming something deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Did that for a while. And then as my youngest was getting ready to go away to college, I was kind of going, what the heck am I going to do now? Like I've been technically still a stay-at-home mom. I consider myself always. So I started a podcast. I was like, I was entering that. I'm technically past midlife, they say. What the experts, midlife is, I think 35 or 40 at most, but it felt like it was the midlife for me. And so I created a podcast that caters towards people in that midlife where we're entering that new phase of reinvention. And then in the culmination of all of that and launching the podcast, I then decided I'm young enough, I'm going to pursue a new accreditation. So I'm in school to become a functional medicine practitioner, because health and wellness has always been my passion. So that's kind of the nutshell version.
Listen, I want to save this for a different podcast, but I think just for maybe just an offline conversation you and I need to have is, what is it that you're doing to look as fabulous? So for those of you who are listening, Erin looks fabulous, and I cannot ever imagine that you're in your 50s. So I don't know if it's yoga, I don't know what secrets you have. You look fabulous. Really, it's
I'll share all my skincare secrets with you.
please do, because God knows I need help. But so that's really interesting, and I think it's very powerful, and I think it's very um, I guess, relatable to people because I have quite a few of my audiences who are mothers who are looking to return back into the workforce. And for better or for worse, the corporate world is not always kind, right, to that. But I love it that you brought up the point of all the things that you were doing. And I think there's so much to learn from that in general, right? Like a lot of people have this misconception of, stay-at-home moms. But I think, first of all, motherhood, obviously, as we all can agree, is probably one of the hardest jobs you can have. And it requires so much of the skill set that you would be, some people don't ever acquire in a corporate world, such as emotional intelligence and patience and organization and all these things, and empathy and understanding and all these things that are so valuable today in the corporate world, yet so discredited when somebody who's trying to return back to the workforce, if the corporate is kind of there. So I think that's pretty interesting. What has been your experience with kind of, obviously you didn't really, I guess you chose not to go back to the corporate world. You chose to do something else. But what has been the feedback? Do you see this as still a thing? That there's this kind of little mini discrimination almost for mothers?
Oh, I absolutely do. I have a lot of friends that are in the corporate world who maybe had taken a break. And I do think that oftentimes being a stay-at-home parent, it doesn't even have to be a mom. It could be a stay-at-home dad.
Yep.
You are really running a mini corporation and you're making sure that everything goes off well without it's not valued in society. That is actually something that I think that being the stay-at-home parent is very undervalued. And it's something that I think it is one of the hardest jobs because you're not getting all the accolades, you're not getting all the raises or bonuses, or your boss saying like, nice work on that presentation. No, your kids are like, what's for dinner? And you're like, meatloaf, and they're like, I hate meatloaf.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
So you really, it is a lot about finding your own value in what you're doing. You have to be intrinsically motivated. I think maybe as a stay-at-home mom, I found lots of ways to fill my time. And so I do think there is still a lot of bias or, stigma maybe surrounding being a stay-at-home parent. And I chose not to return to corporate America because I wanted to, I just think that, and I love what you're doing and what you're, educating your listeners on, is that sometimes you have to create your own path and your own, what is your passion? And luckily it is a privilege for me that I was able to stay at home, but we made financial sacrifices for that. We chose to live on one income and it wasn't easy by any means, but, but I do acknowledge that I have, the privilege that I had that privilege, because it's not possible for everyone. And I don't take that privilege lightly. But we made sacrifices for that to happen. And so I think, that really, that sometimes you have to create like, what is going to be your next step? It probably would have been easier for me, or maybe not easier, but it might have been just, I might have had a smoother transition if I would have just said, I'm going to go back to corporate America. I could have started, I'm a kind of a go-getter. I don't ever want to settle for, just being mediocre. So maybe I could have started, in a sales position, and I would have, made sure that I always gave it 110% and hopefully, risen up through the ranks. But for me, it was just more creating I got really specific about what is my passion, and then creating a job that kind of, or a path that was around that.
And what has led you to the wellness space? Why that?
So interesting. At 30, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I don't know if you know what that is. And at that point, I just spent tons of time doing research. How can I, really get to the root of the disease?
Tell us a little bit more about that, if you don't mind. Describe it for our listeners.
So what MS is? So multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disorder that is where your body attacks itself, your central nervous system. So you have this you have nerves in your brain, right? In these synapses that are covered with this material. It's like a fatty substance called myelin. Think of it like insulation on a telephone cord or a power cord. And this myelin protects your nerves from just all kinds of bacteria, just all kinds of like wear and tear. Well, in MS, for some reason, your body allows these particular cells called T cells and B cells, doesn't really matter what they are, but they're immune fighters. They are always on the lookout for like the bad guys in your body. And for some reason, it's allowed to cross in the blood-brain barrier, and they go into the brain, and then they attack the myelin, and they eat away that fatty substance, which then exposes your nerves to your cerebral spinal fluid, and it slows down conduction. So you think about if you have a power cord and you get a little break in the plastic, it won't always like power your computer or your TV or whatever. If you, then you'll get electrical tape, or you might get a new, and you like wrap it. And so that's basically what MS is. It's just a breakdown in your immune system where your body starts to attack itself. And there's a lot of causes. There's no known like one cause, and there's no cure, but there's lots of things that you can do that help you to remain vibrant and healthy. And that's what I started just educating myself from day one. Well, I had panic attacks for about 6 months and cried every day, but then I was like, you know what? I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. So, I'm going to stop feeling sorry for myself, and I'm going to start making changes. And that's when I got really into health and wellness and just like trying to make everything from scratch for my family. I just did lots of research on nutrition, on mind-body connection, which is what led me to yoga, and then led me to becoming a yoga therapist. And so it just really evolved out of a need to figure out what the heck was going on with me. Yeah. And now I just want everyone to live as vibrantly as possible and just really live their best lives. And the functional medicine piece is actually like a 3-year program that will allow me to dive deeper into the root cause of disease. So.
Yeah, no, yoga has been, keeps coming up in so many different conversations, even with scientists these days, in terms of the benefit of it, not only on that, the fact that you just feel good and all jelly afterwards, but there's that emotional piece, there's that internal health piece. So what has been the biggest surprises maybe, or the biggest lessons you've learned as you started to practice it and really dive deeper into this health journey?
Yeah. So the crazy thing is I went to yoga the first time, or when I started a kind of very regular practice, was I wanted to just get more flexible because I did have a little bit of balance issues. One of my symptoms is a little bit of vertigo, dizziness. So I know that with anything, if you practice it, you'll get better at it. Balance is one of those things as well, even though you kind of think like, a lot of people don't think that, I can improve my balance by practicing it, but you can. So I went strictly for balance. I was like, I would come in late. I would leave before Shavasana because I was like, I'm not here for all that woo-woo stuff. I just want to get the physical benefits. But yoga has a sneaky way of working on you when you least expect it. And it really starts to give you that connection with your body back. I think, are so busy. And even as a stay-at-home mom, I was busy, but even like people in the corporate world, are being tugged in so many different directions. We learn how to shut off from our bodies. We learn how to kind of ignore them. We learn how to just like not pay attention to the symptoms that are, kind of in the back of our, that are just kind of festering, if you will, and they're brewing. And so I think for me, it was just this greater, first off, appreciation for my body, just as the wonderful machine that it is. It's just an awesome, like it's so much more than just this physical body. It houses our soul. It's just, I have such an appreciation, but I just started really experiencing the benefits that yoga brings, which is it downgrades your central nervous system. We stay in that fight or flight. It's called the sympathetic part of your central nervous system. And it really downgrades you into that rest and digest and parasympathetic. And so I have, knock on wood, I get MRIs for my MS and have stayed like steady, which is not common because I think, and I owe it all to yoga. I swear I tell people, and it's not an exaggeration, that yoga saved my life. I mean, it's so much more than just like stretching your body. It's just this connection that you have. It's doing something very mindful. And it's not even that you have to practice a hard yoga practice. You don't even have to practice for an hour. If you just do 5 minutes where you're really being intentional with your time and your attention, and you're paying attention like to the feedback that your body is giving you. So I recommend it for everyone.
I feel like I'm gonna do yoga after this chat.
You are.
I used to be really big into yoga, and then I kind of have this like I'm super into it and I'm like hardcore, or I'm not touching it at all. Like I'm not doing anything, and I'm in that I'm not doing anything stage. And you're not the first conversation I've had where I was like, it's like a little knock, like you should really think about yoga. You should really think about yoga.
And you don't even have to go to a class. Just do some stuff at home. I mean, and you don't have to be going, to like a hot yoga class every day to like be a yogi and be on that yogic path. I mean, it is something that you can just find little small pockets in your day where you're just like, you can do it in your chair.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just pausing and then just breathing and just making that connection back.
Yeah, I mean, the breathing part itself is so big. And I think that's what it is about yoga. It's like you said, it's that intentional. It's taking a moment to just be quiet and kind of, observe your body. 'Cause it's all about like how to, really understanding how your body feels and just taking your attention towards that versus everything that might be going on in your head, right? And that's usually what happens when you go into like either meditation or even yoga practice. You're just like, either you're just uncomfortable, at least that's how I feel. I don't know if other people feel that way, or your mind is just so busy and it takes it down a notch, and it is very, very powerful. And the whole breathing, I don't remember, there are statistics like we as humans, like as everyday like life, we only use a small percentage of oxygen that our body actually needs. I don't know if you know any statistics about that, but it's like crazy how little we properly breathe. I don't know if that's the way to say it, but like we don't even breathe correctly.
Well, it's so funny that you said that because just yesterday I went to a business association for women and I taught 50 women how to breathe. My husband said, I hope that they're still alive when you get there if they haven't been breathing before you show up. But we breathe on average about 20,000 times a day. We use about a third of our lung power, if I remember the stats correctly. And most people are chest breathers. They breathe, they use their neck muscles, which is why you end up with this like strain and people are like, oh, my neck is so tight, or they headaches. Really, honestly, what people should be doing every day when you breathe, and we breathe without having to think about it, right? It's part of your autonomic nervous system. And thank God, because that's why you can multitask and do something else, because you're going to breathe automatically. You don't have to think about it. But it does really have a lot of benefits if you just, for even a minute, pay attention to your breathing and notice, like, are you taking full breaths? Are you letting your belly expand out on the inhale? Which I know as a woman, and you being a woman as well, we're often like, we want to hold our stomach in and have that flat stomach. No, let that belly like go when you breathe in. And then like, as you exhale, your belly should go back in. And most people, I would say this, I've read stats anywhere between like 70 to 90% of people are breathing. It's called paroxysmal. I can't say that word. Paroxysmal breathing, where you're breathing using your chest instead of your belly.
Interesting. Yeah, that's super, super interesting. Yeah, because it's like I'm trying to breathe now, and it's like it's awkward when you try to like breathe out with your belly. Like you have to really be, because it's not automatic, and we have to be again like being intentional. That's so interesting. Now I'm like pausing. For people who are listening, I'm sorry, you have to hear pauses. Anyway, that's interesting. And tell me a little bit more about then your podcast. Like I know you started it, and I know we had an offline chat about it, but tell me a little bit more about the podcast and what prompted you to do that.
Well, during COVID, I don't know if you or your listener know, I was doing Clubhouse. Mm-hmm. It was the auditory app. It became the rage during COVID because everybody was stuck at home. What else can you do but get on and like start chatting? And I was hosting a a room called Old Enough to Know Better. And we would chat about everything from, plastic surgery in midlife to reinvention. And the reason that I chose Clubhouse, well, first off, it had become kind of the rage, but was because I'm not technically savvy at all. And so I was like, I wanted to start a podcast, but I was like, oh, how do you even do that? I thought you had to be like a master, mixer person.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just decided that some people that I had that were like, I want to be able to come, but with Clubhouse, it's not recorded. You have to attend the room right when the time was, right? So you couldn't re-listen to it later. And so I finally just said, I got to figure this out. And I actually met a gal, my first host, my first co-host. I had the concept. And so she actually ended up taking over all the editing, which was such a blessing because, again, like I said, I don't have any technical skills. And for about a year, because we launched October of 2021, I think. And then for about a year, we hosted it together. And then she had to take a step back. And I knew I didn't want the podcast to die. So I ended up finding a new host, and I've learned how to do everything on my own. And I've learned how to edit. I've learned how to add the music in and do all the fading and stuff. And, I just felt like it was for me such an important, I just felt this calling that I need to share the nitty gritty for people in midlife, because nobody warns you about some of the stuff, and then you're like, what the heck? What's going on? Why am I feeling this way? And so I wanted to kind of talk about the things that people don't want to talk about.
And give me an example of that. Give me
a
couple of things
when you get in your 40s and you start going through perimenopause, you start getting chin hairs and you're like, what the heck? Am I turning into a billy goat? Or and you start getting gray eyebrow hairs and you start experiencing, even things like with hot flashes and all of the things that go along with perimenopause, and not even just physical things, but then feeling like you've come to this point in your life where you don't even know, who am I? Am I, is this it? Is this really all that life is? Okay, well, I gotta figure out, it's not even about making maybe an impact on a global scale, but am I making an impact, and becoming an empty nester, having to let go of your kids and let them fail and make mistakes, and creating healthy boundaries with your adult children. We've talked about that. We've talked about things like plastic surgery, to fill or not to fill, start noticing changes in your skin and maybe even men, because the plastic surgery is on the rise for males. So maybe your male listeners are going oh, what's this double chin I got going on here? And so it's just nobody, everybody kind of wants to pretend like they're not having, those feelings, or that, or they're having things done and they're being very secretive about it. I had my eyes done for my 50th birthday. I'm super open about it. I talk about that. I had my hoods lifted, I say, because I was starting to have, that where I look tired all the time. I don't personally do a bunch of fillers, or I don't do fillers or Botox. I've done Botox in the past, but so being open about it, not hiding it, not, being ashamed. It's not something to be ashamed of. If you want to do it, do it. If you don't, and you want to just grow, if you want to age gracefully, do that. I'm somewhere in the middle between aging gracefully and doing a few things.
Yeah, I think I'll be right there with you as well. I'm not pro or against anything. I'm you know what? I don't know. Ask me in a few years. I might be down for that.
You just have to for me, for my 50th birthday, almost 3 years ago, I had my eyes done. It was more every time I looked in the mirror and I had, kind of the hoods, I felt great. I still felt 25, but when I look in the mirror, I was like, oh, I look so tired. So then it would make me feel tired.
Yeah.
And so then when I saved up my money and got my eyes done, then I was like, now when I look in the mirror, I'm like, okay, I look rested. The inside and the outside match.
Mm.
And, I mean, I'm all about the balance. Like you said, you're open to anything. I'm not for or against. I think people should make up their own choice, and just do what they feel comfortable doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as society, we so just want to have all the positive, good conversations, and we feel like it's like shameful, like you said, to have these other thoughts and feelings and agreeing or disagreeing on a particular topic. But it's like to each his own, it's healthy. We're all thinking that, you know,
Right.
we're all thinking that. So absolutely. What is one question you wish people ask themselves more often?
That is a good question. I wish people ask themselves more often, um,
Mm-hmm.
what is possible for me? So instead of I think that oftentimes, or maybe a better way for me to say this is, what is the worst that can happen? Maybe that's the best way to say it. What's the worst that can happen? I'll fail. And that's how I felt about the podcast. Nobody may listen, or nobody may. I'm hosting a retreat this year in Italy. What's the worst that can happen? Is I have low attendance, but at least I tried.
You'll enjoy a nice trip to Italy.
Exactly. So I think maybe the question is, what is possible and what is the worst that could happen?
Yeah, I love those because I think that eliminates that fear, and I think that's what we're always like, we're always whenever we're stuck in a decision, or especially for a lot of my listeners who want to make a change, that you get paralyzed in that like next move. But usually, what it is, you just need to address your worst case scenario, like your worst fear.
Exactly. And I mean, I totally have fear about everything. It's not that I don't have fear, and I'm not even saying that you shouldn't have fear. Sometimes fear it's a healthy thing. It helps you, maybe take a little bit of caution about things, but then usually it's just to borrow the theme from Nike, just do it. Like, what's the worst that can happen, right? You fall on your face, and then you're like, okay, well, scrap that. That didn't work. Let's see what can work. Failure is not like the worst thing,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Especially if you learn from it.
Yeah, and it's usually I don't want to say like I don't want to put a positive spin, but it's usually a good thing because you're like that means like the cliche saying you're actually doing something worthy, right? If everything is just smooth and easy, then I'd be questioning that as well. Like it shouldn't be all smooth and easy. There should be failures. That's how you learn and that's how you grow and get better. And it's just I think it builds resilience. There's so many positives. Obviously not. Hopefully you don't fail every single time. Hopefully there's some wins,
Well,
but
usually you learn something from your failure, and that you can apply. Either you reinvent the idea that you had, or the quest that you were on, or along the way, the next thing kind of presents itself. So
yeah. So what are you most excited for this year?
well, this year is my year of travel.
Mhm.
I'm super excited about my school, and I'm doing that. But like I was saying, I'm hosting my first international retreat. I've hosted retreats before, like locally. I live in Georgia, so I've done some retreats in the mountains of North Georgia. But this is the first year. It's something I've wanted to do, and this has kind of been the culmination of the podcast. The podcast was like, I want to find a group of midlife people who almost like an eat, pray, love, if you will, like, who am I? This is like the whole purpose of the retreat is reclaiming your wholeness, like finding out who you are again, like after you've been busy, maybe either because you've had a really successful corporate career, or you've raised children, or maybe both. And this is that time for you to like kind of focus back on yourself.
When are you doing like around Italy? Are you doing one location?
It's one location.
Hmm.
It's going to be in October 20th through the 26th. It's in Montevigiano. It's like the Tuscany region.
Oh.
It's a big retreat center, but we're going to have everything from yoga.
Hmm.
I have my co-host is doing it with me from yoga. We're going to do yoga, but we're going to visit some of the little neighboring towns. We're going to do wine tasting. Of course, you can't go to Italy and not, even
Definitely
though
not.
I'm not a wine drinker, but when you go to Italy, you drink wine. And I've been several times. And we're going to do a cooking class. I mean, there is just lots of activities. There'll be downtime. People will be able to, we're going to have a program, but we're also going to have a lot of unstructured time as well.
Mhm. That's awesome. And so if somebody wants to get in touch with you or learn a little bit more about the program or just follow your journey, listen to your podcast, where can they find you?
So they can find me on Facebook or Instagram, Midlife State of Mind podcast. Also, they can follow along. My website will be launching next week, midlifestateofmindpodcast.com. And they can also follow me on the socials, Erin Beadle. But any of the socials, I'm there.
Awesome. And I'm going to make sure to share it in podcast notes. Erin, thank you so much. And like I said, I would love to do a separate conversation on secrets to staying young. And also I would love to have you back after post the yoga retreat to share your experiences and maybe share some kind of findings from that. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much having me on, and for your listeners tuning in. And I hope that they maybe are ready to try something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready. I'm ready to get back into yoga. Maybe it's not new, but you've inspired me to do something, even if it's 5 minutes at the end of this day to do something. So thank you for that.
Well, awesome. Thank you.